Okay, welcome to the last video on tissues. This video is going to actually cover the next two general categories, which is muscle tissue and nervous tissue. Both these tissues, have their own systems. So we're going to, spend more time on muscle in the future, and we're going to spend more time on nervous tissue in the future. So I imagine most of your studying is going to be on the other two, the epithelial tissues and the connective tissues. But don't forget about muscle. There's a few things I want you to focus on when you're comparing the three types. So you have skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. What I want you to look at are obviously the locations. Skeletal muscle is going to be attached to bones. Cardiac muscle is in your heart. Smooth muscle is kind of all over the place in a variety of different organs. I also want you to look at the cells and what they look like. So the cells are called myocytes, but the cell shapes are a lot different from one another. So that's one characteristic. I also want you to think about whether the muscle tissue is voluntarily controlled, so you can consciously control it, or if it's involuntary. And then the third property is what we call striations. So striations are stripes. So two of the three muscle tissues have these stripe patterns inside of the cells when you look at them under the microscope. And we're going to learn what causes that another day, but it's one trait that we can use to differentiate, or at least narrow it down to two of the three. So skeletal muscle has striations. You can see it pretty obvious in this picture here and in this drawing here. But so does cardiac muscle. Whereas smooth muscle we refer to as non-striated. You don't see any of these stripes inside the cells. Okay, so let's begin with skeletal muscle. Where is it? It's attached to bones using tendons. So for example, this is that kind of same drawing we saw previously. This is your biceps brachii muscle, and it has a couple tendons here that attach it to your shoulder blade or scapula. So this muscle is skeletal muscle. Its job is to move bones. All right. Now some skeletal muscle moves skin. So facial expression, right? You're probably smiling right now listening to me. And that facial expression is skeletal muscle, but it's not moving bone, it's moving skin. So that's its location. Function, obviously movement, posture, facial expression. Skeletal muscle generates a lot of heat. And then some of your skeletal muscle can protect. So like your abdomen, your abdominal wall is made up of skeletal muscle, and it can protect your inside organs. Okay, so looking at the description here, we're looking at the cells. They're long, cylindrical, striated, and we often call them fibers because they're long cells. In fact, the cells run the whole length of the muscle. So this biceps muscle has cells that are going to start at this tendon and run the whole length and then end at that tendon. So these are very, very long cells. They're not going to look at all like that cell drawing we studied in the previous chapter. In fact, they don't have one nucleus, they have many nuclei. So we call that multinucleated cells. All right. So very interesting cell shape, long and cylindrical. A lot of nuclei because that cell is so long, one nucleus just isn't going to do it. And then it is striated. It has those stripes. And then finally, it is the one of the three that's voluntary. The other two are not voluntary. We call them involuntary. Skeletal muscle is voluntary. You can actually consciously control it. So next one, cardiac muscle. Obviously in the heart, cardiac means heart. The cells are different looking. The cells are striated, but they're not long and cylindrical. They're kind of branched. They kind of connect end to end. So this is one cell, and then here's the little connection to another cell. Whereas those skeletal muscle cells were the entire length of the muscle. All right. So branched, striated muscle fibers, or myocytes, typically one nucleus. So there's one cell, and it has that one nucleus. They attach end to end at an area called the intercalated disc. So basically, where these two cells attach to one another, there's two plasma membranes up against one another. So what it does is it makes it a little darker. So you can actually see where the cells are attached to one another. So right there's an attachment, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there. Those are called intercalated discs. And then finally, this muscle is involuntary, right? You can't consciously speed up your heart. You don't have to consciously keep your heart beating. It is involuntary, and it'll contract on its own. How does it do it? That's an A&P2 topic when we get to the cardiovascular system. Okay, third muscle is smooth muscle. It's called smooth muscle because there's no stripes. So the tissue kind of looks smooth as opposed to the striated muscle types. So non-striated, again, lacking striations. The myocytes are kind of what we would call spindle-shaped, so they're kind of tapered. Where's a good one? This is probably a good one here. So one end kind of comes to a point, and then the other end comes to a little point. So they're not very big. They're just these little cells, kind of a normal-looking cell with kind of tapered ends. Involuntary, all right? You don't have to consciously control any of your smooth muscle. Where is it? Now, most of it, you'll notice I have here in bold, is in the wall of hollow internal structures. So, for example, blood vessels are hollow, but they're filled with blood. So that wall of a blood vessel has smooth muscle. That allows the blood vessel to kind of dilate if it needs more blood going to, wherever that blood vessel is going, or it can constrict. So the smooth muscle of a blood vessel dilates and constricts the blood vessel. Your airways have to dilate and constrict. So if you need more air to get down into your lungs, your airways are going to what we call bronchodilate. They're going to dilate. When you're at rest, you don't need much air. So your breathing rate goes down and your airways actually get smaller. And then you've got, GI tract, stomach, intestines all have muscle to move the material inside. Gallbladder has muscle so it can eject bile from it. Your urinary bladder, so the only way you're going to urinate is if that bladder has muscle and it can contract and squeeze out the urine. And then a female uterus has a lot of smooth muscle for when that baby's going to be delivered. So either walls of hollow organs, and then there's a few exceptions, like your eye actually has some muscle on the inside of it. Your iris, which is that pigmented part with the pupil in the middle, it constricts and dilates because it has smooth muscle. So, and there's a few other areas which we'll probably get to at some point, but for now we need to know that it's non-striated. The shapes are spindle shaped, largely found in hollow organs, and involuntarily controlled, and typically the muscle's there to move something that's on the inside of that hollow organ. Okay, so there's smooth muscle. Last tissue, we're at the end, is nervous tissue. And again, I've mentioned this a couple times. There's a whole chapter dedicated to it. So for now, you just need to remember it's in your brain, it's in your spinal cord, it's in your nerves. It's made up of cells. A lot of them are called neurons, that are the cells that can produce electrical signals. And then most of it is actually neuroglia cells, which are more of a supporting cell. And there's a bunch of types of these that we get to when we get to the nervous system. All right, so the neuroglia are the other cell types. And then the neurons are kind of what you would think of when you think of the nervous system, the ability to produce nerve impulses. All right, So those are your tissues. Right now, you're probably thinking, wow, that's a lot of information to get through, and it is. Um, but, don't do it all at once. Try to break it down into sections, right? Just work on the epithelial tissue. That's plenty to work on in one sitting. Then move on. If you try to study this whole chapter in one sitting, it's going to be hard for your brain to, soak all that in. So that's kind of my recommendation. But this is, a chapter that's going to really challenge you. It's going to challenge whether you have, time commitment. Are you going to put enough time into this chapter? What are your study techniques? This is when you really want to start to hone in on what works for you. Okay? And again, don't feel bad if you got to rewatch these lectures. I've had students tell me that they watch my lectures over and over again. Some poor students have even, figured out a way to listen to me in their car. And I feel bad, but if it works, it works. One thing I always tell students is you got to start using your time wisely. You got to be efficient. We as humans waste a lot of our time during the day doing things that aren't helping you. You're on the phone looking at TikTok videos, or you're on Instagram, or you're watching YouTube videos. Well, if you can cut back on that kind of wasted time and replace it with A&P time, you'll see that you actually have a lot more time than you think you do. Okay, so that's a little bit of advice. That's the end of chapter 4. Good luck. Again, always reach out to me. Use any kind of resources in the module. There are ID games. There are Quizlets. Use your lab to help you identify and remember the locations. All right. Best of luck. You will need it.